It's all quiet in the underground bunker. Doors closed, locks bolted. But the Great One isn't just resting on his laurels. He's making sure your weekend is even better by giving you his best. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Can somebody tell me anything Harris Biden have done right? Anything they've done that's actually helped the country? Or their party, for that matter. Or their media, for that matter. CNBC, the Dow tumbles 1,000 points. S&P 500 posts worst day since 2022 in global market sell-off. In 2022, Harris and Biden were in charge. The stocks fell sharply, posting the worst day in nearly 2 years. As worries over the health of the U.S. economy sparked a global market sell-off, the Dow dropped 1,033.99 points, 2.6%. The NASDAQ, and why does this matter to you? We'll get to that. The NASDAQ composite lost 3.43% and closed at, number doesn't matter. S&P 500 slid 3%, all in one day. Now keep in mind, that's on top of Friday where they slid too. Fears of a U.S. recession were the main culprit for the global market meltdown after Friday's disappointing July jobs reports. Investors are also concerned the Federal Reserve is behind in cutting interest rates to bolster an economic slow. Here's the problem. Did the Republicans spend too much? You bet they did. But the Democrats spent far more, and they did it as the economy was coming out of the pandemic and growing. Jobs were being created. And he dumped this multi-trillion-dollar debt, which they call the Inflation Reduction Act, because they lie. Everything is the opposite of what they say, which was a massive redistribution of wealth to extremist left-wing groups, corporations pushing climate change, and all the rest. It's done nothing substantively for our economy. And now we have all this paper money, if you will, following goods and services. And so what happens is stagflation. I don't care how many of these fools talk about recession. It's stagflation. The economy is beginning to show cracks, but it has been. For the average person, it's been cracking for years now. Since Biden stepped in and Harris stepped in, it's no joke. You can hear people talking about it all the time. I go to the grocery store. Every now and then, not often anymore, I go to fast food restaurant. I hear what people are saying. They can't believe it. You can't blame corporate profits. Corporate profits are way off, way off. And corporations made profits during the Trump administration, too. We never saw anything like this during the Trump administration. Look, Marxist/socialist policies do not work. They do not work. Killing the golden goose means there's no golden eggs. When you wring its neck through taxes and regulations, it doesn't produce for the economy. And constantly talking down the successful people, constantly talking down the market system, constantly attacking capitalism by word and by deed, this is what you get. This is what you get. And it affects, they make it like, oh, if we only tax the rich. Where do you think the rich put their money, for God's sakes? You think there's a fund that only the rich can put their money in and therefore the rest of us are unaffected or affected? It doesn't work that way. And rather than pushing for more success, for more people, no. They push for equity. You heard Mumbles. Mumbles. That's right. That's her new name. Mumbles pushing for equity. Equity means nobody can be too successful. We all have to end in the same place. That's what she said. She's such an idiot. That would be Kamala Harris. Anyway, then we have this. So the economy is a big concern. Tell me, what are Kamala Harris's proposals for the economy? I challenge any host on any of these phony TV shows on MSNBC or CNN to call in. What are Kamala Harris's proposals for creating jobs? What are her proposals for getting inflation under control? What are her proposals for growing the economy? What are they? What are they? Go on her website. Show me where they are. They don't exist. She has no proposals for the economy except to choke it to death. Her proposal is what I've been calling the pillow proposal. Take it and smother it. She has no idea, but she's an ideologue. So that's what they fall back on, like Bernie Sanders or AOC or Tlaib. Look, it's bad enough that they're in Congress. We cannot tolerate one of these radical, vapid kooks in the office of the presidency. Nobody can. Black, white, brown, yellow, albino, nobody can. Nobody. So this is the economy. Now, what about the border? The border's a disaster. They've destroyed the economy and they've destroyed the border. They can play game, I'm not the border czar. No, but you are the vice president. Of course you were the border czar, but you are the vice president, right? Right, Kamala? Surprise, surprise, New York Post. Team Biden has halted a program that flies migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua. Well, that's how Bernie Sanders pronounces it. He knows his commies. And Venezuela into the United States if the Department of Homeland Security uncovered, ready? Massive fraud by the program's applicants. Say what? Gee, did anyone really think there wouldn't be fraud? This is a program, mind you, that never got congressional authorization and violates laws already on the books, writes the Post. Yet despite the patently obvious likelihood of fraud, Biden and border czar Kamala Harris went ahead with it anyway, flying in nearly 500,000 people since October 2022. And remember, they did it secretly. Now, a review by DHS's Citizenship and Immigration Service, CIS, found that possibly tens of thousands of applicants from migrants' sponsors, quote-unquote, contained fraudulent information. The same addresses, for example, used by many of them. Fake Social Security numbers and zip codes, and even the same verbatim answers to questions. You know one of the great horror stories that's not reported on? Illegal aliens, legal and illegal, are coming into the country, and they're tapping into the Social Security system. They're tapping into fake Social Security cards. They're bankrupting the Social Security system. What did he say? Oh, it's true. Hello, migrants, writes the Post, have risked their lives making treacherous journeys through dangerous terrain and dealing with the most ruthless criminals to get here. Resorting to fraud is a no-brainer. Heck, even their asylum claims have been proven to be bogus. When asked, migrants openly admit they want to relocate to America not because they've been persecuted or their lives are in danger back home, as required by asylum, but for better economic opportunities. Now that CIS has documented fraud and on a massive scale, the program has been frozen. Great. Is anyone going to ask Kamala about this? Anybody? Waste of time to ask Joe, even if you could get a question to him. What? But Harris just keeps talking because the media allow her to get away with this. Are Biden, Harris, and company really that desperate to flood in as many people as fast as possible, allowing them to cut the line, overwhelm cities, and flout Congress? If Team Biden thinks these people really deserve to be here, let them persuade lawmakers to create a legal pathway. And good luck with that. Their refusal to do that is just one more reason they need to be replaced. So they've destroyed the economy, and now it's really going to... it takes a little while for the decisions, the really horrendous decisions that are made by the Marxist Socialists, to work their way through the economy, because the American economy is massive, it's diverse, it's got infinite tributaries. But finally it starts to kick in, and it's kicking in now. Inflation is not going to come down. It's going to get worse. Jobless claims are going to go up. You can hear today with the stock market. The reason it's important that the stock market not crash is because if the stock market crashes, that means all these larger businesses have to fire tons of people, and their businesses are going to contract. Firing tons of people, businesses contracting, means the American economy is going to contract, people are going to lose their jobs, and inflation will continue to go up. That's what's happening. You can see it at the grocery store. You can see it at the gas pump. You can see it when you're trying to get now apartments to rent. You're trying to purchase a home. You can see it everywhere. The price is just crazy. I'll give you a perfect example. I went to Chick-fil-A before I came here. I wanted to check it out because I wanted Chick-fil-A sandwich, Mr. Producer. Just the sandwich. I didn't get the fries. And a large Diet Coke. Almost $9. For just the sandwich and I don't blame them. You know, they're a pass-through. It's what they are. What happened? What happened is the Biden-Harris administration, the Democrat Party, and their Marxist Socialist agenda. What happens is products and services become less available. Prices go up, and the value of your money goes down. That's what you're facing. That's what's happening. All this talk, well, the Fed was too slow, the Fed needs to be... I understand these monetarists. I'm not necessarily opposed to them. But on the fiscal side, the Congress side, it's a disaster. And the Democrats don't intend to do a damn thing about it. Why? They don't care if the economy crashes. What happens if an economy crashes? All hell breaks loose. What happens when all hell breaks loose? More and more power to the central government. What happened during the pandemic? You lost many of your liberties. Some of them you still haven't gotten back. And they'll throw out things like the 6-foot rule. There was no science behind the 6-foot rule. Wear the paper mask. There was no science behind the paper masks. It didn't matter. Where there was science, like little kids should be able to go to school because they're the least endangered group, and yet they can build immunities to it. What do? They shut down the schools. This isn't science. This is quackery. Quackery. Marxism and socialism is quackery. The problem is it creates impoverishment, kills a lot of people. But it's quackery. And that's why Kamala Harris cackles, Mr. Producer. Quack, quack.
Mark Levin.
Making your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Tell me, America, how much private economic experience does Joe Biden have? Absolutely none. He never worked in the private sector. How about Kamala Harris? Absolutely none. She never worked in the private sector. You know, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't actually experienced being in the private sector, how do you become an expert? They're experts on bloated government. That's all they're experts on. Taking resources out of the hands of the private sector for the government, for power, to redistribute, to create voting constituencies, to group people into economic categories, racial categories, you name it. This is why they don't believe in success and merit. They believe in these government identity projects, DEI, ESG, CRT, not MERIT. And by the way, this hurts people of all races, backgrounds, and nationalities. Now look at Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Donald Trump obviously spent his entire life as a developer. J.D. Vance is a successful entrepreneur. Both have not just private sector experience, but great successful private sector experience. This is not important to the media because the media are like they're like the leeches on the ass of the government. That's right. They exist because of government. They don't exist because of the private sector. So you have two incredibly successful men. Their strengths are never touted by the media. They're never recognized. They're never appreciated. And yet that's exactly what you need to build an economy, experience in the economy. If you want to build government, bureaucracy, taxes, regulations, then you vote Democrat. If you want to vote for economic growth and prosperity, wealth creation, then you vote Republican. And I'm not talking about all the time. I'm talking about this time. The two candidates running on the Republican side are successful entrepreneurs. Biden has never even been in the private sector. He gets money from government, and not just our government, from foreign governments. Kamala Harris, she's never been in the private sector. All of her experience is climbing the ladder one way or another and getting power, which she fritters away, which she uses for her own personal advancement. But there's been nothing profoundly important or impactful in a positive way in any of the offices that she's held. She doesn't know how to run an economy, quote unquote. She doesn't know what's best for the economy. She'll be getting advice from political operatives, pollsters, not real economists. The economy's tanking. Not tanking for rich people, tanking for everybody else. And it's been tanking. It's been tanking since Donald Trump left office. He had to rebuild the economy after the pandemic. That's exactly what he was doing. How did he do it? It's not a national secret. You've got to slash taxes and slash regulations and allow the golden goose to breathe so she can create golden eggs. That's the way it works. It's not hard. But there's this ideological element in the Democrat Party. As I tell you, American Marxism. That's who she is. That's Kamala. She doesn't have any proposal. Somebody will finally slap one together. In the last over 2 weeks, she hasn't slapped anything together. What about the Middle East? Let me be as blunt as I know how. She, in part, is responsible for what's about to take place in the Middle East. The things that she said, her conduct over 2 weeks ago, when Netanyahu came to Washington, D.C., her very public effort to undermine him, to smear him. And then after she meets with him, they're smiling, shake hands. When he leaves, to stab him in the back. This is watched very carefully by the Islamo-Nazis in the Middle East. Very, very carefully. And so what did Hezbollah do? It fired right on a soccer field and slaughtered 12 Israelis, who were Druze, but 12 Israelis. And the Israelis fought back, and then Joe Biden leaks. There's a brilliant article by Ruth Baum at JNS, the Jewish News Service. Brilliant article. And she talks about these high-level generals, some of whom are now cabinet members, and how they are leaking illegally confidential discussions that the war cabinet's having, or discussions with Biden and so forth, for the purpose of undermining their commander-in-chief, the prime minister. And she says it is extraordinarily difficult in Israel to get these clearances at the highest level. There are lie detectors, there are interviews of interviews. Yet these people are doing exactly this. And she said, well, why aren't there lie detectors now? I can tell you this. Their equivalent of the Secretary of Defense, this guy Gallant, he's a disgusting disgrace. He's Biden's man on the inside of the war cabinet. And there's others, too. Imagine trying to run your country. You're surrounded by the enemy. You're trying to develop strategies and plans to deal with them. And your Secretary of Defense, again, the equivalent effectively, is leaking to the media and to the Biden team. It's really quite horrendous. There's going to be a major war in the Middle East, by all accounts. And 3.5 years ago, there was peace. 3.5 years ago, you had Israel and Arab countries signing peace agreements and recognizing each other diplomatically and commercially, working with each other. Next in line was Saudi Arabia. Then in comes the Biden administration. Hamas was receiving no money from UNRWA, the UN that is really Hamas, because Donald Trump cut them off. Cut them off. The Palestinian Authority, the old PLO, was getting no money from the United States. Trump cut them off because they're slaughtering people, and they still are. Trump put incredible sanctions on Iran, was driving them to their knees economically. The Islamo-Nazis who run the place in Tehran, they were worried about a popular uprising. There were several popular uprisings. There was even one not long ago under Harris-Biden when they murdered a 16-year-old girl because she wouldn't put a scarf over her head. Probably molested, tortured, murdered. And the people who rose up in Iran were mostly women, young women, and they beat them and beat them and beat them down with no effective response from our government. You might remember the people of Iran rose up and almost overthrew that government when Obama was president. He waited 10 days to even say anything. We literally have a Democrat Party that is a special pleader for the Islamo-Nazi regime in Tehran, for a fundamentalist, Islamist, genocidal regime. And they've never been held to account. They've never had to explain exactly what they're doing. We have an administration, the Harris-Biden, Biden-Harris administration, that has individuals who are providing detailed information and communications with the foreign minister of Iran through back channels. And so they dehumanize Netanyahu the way they dehumanize Trump or anybody else they don't like. They dehumanize Clarence Thomas. The whole kit and caboodle. Can you imagine a 1-hour interview with me and Kamala Harris? I'd be very respectful. It'll never happen. Or somebody who really can be trusted to press points, like Kamala Harris. Doesn't have to be Republican or conservative. She won't do it. Lester Holt is hardly a brutal questioner. He's a classy guy, I think. Happens to be African-American. And he asked her a few basic questions, and she couldn't answer them. Couldn't answer why you hadn't gone to the border. I ain't been to Europe either. I mean, this is who she is. This is what she says. So the campaign and the media know they have to hide her. Not from Trump. They're hiding her from you and me. They're hiding her from the voters. Because if the voters learn more about her, people who aren't really focused on politics, just like they learned more about Biden after the debate, they want nothing to do with her. So now we're all standing back like we're dealing with a royal family. Oh, they're going to pick a vice president. Like the royal family. So one of the royals is going to get married. Oh, look at this. It's the damnedest thing. Gives a crap who she picks. This whole thing is undemocratic. This whole thing is totalitarian. From the way they've done this, knocking off the real true nominee of their party before they can get to the convention, installing the vice president, who probably was involved in this coup because she benefited from it, who was lying to the American people about how brilliant Biden was and she wouldn't trigger the 25th Amendment. She's rewarded without any challenge whatsoever. No open convention of any kind. They have virtual votes on the nomination for a Democrat nominee for president. So it doesn't even get to the floor of the convention to even have a discussion. And now she's out there. She's going to pick her vice presidential running mate. You ever seen anything like this in your life? Media, perfectly fine. But when we come back, I want to point something out to you that I touched on last week. I touched on it, Mr. Producer. And there's Jamie Raskin during a speech yesterday. I'm touching on something with you. It was brought up 12 to 18 months ago by Eric Holder, who's doing all the vetting, by the way, for these vice presidential would-be candidates at Kamala Harris's request. Eric Holder and his law firm. Perfect. But I want to clue you in on something. I will be the first to tell you about this, as I've been the first to tell you about all these efforts to take our Constitution and use it, abuse it, destroy it, in service to these American Marxists, led by Jamie Raskin, another coward, just like Chris Christie, who won't come on this program. Doesn't want to be challenged.
Mark Levin. You're listening to the best of Mark Levin.
Under Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, Minnesota became a sanctuary state. He pushed for and got legislation to give illegal immigrants taxpayer-funded health care, taxpayer-funded tuition, and driver's licenses. Tim Walz of Minnesota has been a cheerleader, a pom-pom boy, for the communist country of China. He has deep links to the communist country of China. Just like Bernie Sanders went on a honeymoon in Moscow, he went on a honeymoon in communist China. And he used to oversee a scholarship program funded by Beijing. What else? The list is so long. It is so long. He once proclaimed that he was a proud socialist. I'm sure that video is gone by now, no, Mr. Producer? And we're looking, because the media won't do the job that the media are supposed to do. Here's the Trump campaign, 15 seconds worth, Mr. Producer. Cut 4, go.
Driver's licenses for illegals, transgender surgeries for
Let's
kids.
stop right there. Transgender surgeries for kids. 6-year-olds. Minnesota has the most aggressively leftist transgender surgery for kids law in the nation. Is this what you want, America? I notice they're not talking about that in Philadelphia. I notice the media are not talking about that. They're not talking about any of this. Go ahead.
Riots in our streets. This was Kamala Harris's first decision as a presidential candidate. Kamala is dangerously liberal. We just can't trust her.
Here's what he said. I mentioned the socialism thing at a fundraising Zoom call last week. Cut 5, go.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. Just do the damn work.
Got it? He's basically telling you progressivism is socialism. Of course, he won't say it's Marxism. It's Marxism, but that's good enough. He doesn't shy from this guy's. He comes from the Democrat Farm Labor Party in Minnesota, which is where all the whack jobs come from. On China, cut 6, go.
I lived in China, and as I said, I've been there about 30 times, but if someone tells you they're an expert on China, they're probably not telling you the truth, because it's a complex country. But it's critically important for us. I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship. I totally disagree.
Boy, Communist China's rooting for him, and they got what they wanted. Communist China's favorite son is now running, and soon will be, for vice president of the United States. Can you imagine this? They had Biden, and now they think they're going to have this Tim Walz. Only you can stop this. What about the Electoral College? America, we've talked about this before. Do we really want 11 blue states deciding for all and forever who our president and vice president is? It's a very complicated debate. They came up with this brilliant idea. So all states have a say. Some states produce more oil than others. Some states produce more food than others. Some states have more people than others. And they said, look, in order to have a fairly harmonious society, we have to have representation from all corners of this country. Tim Walz says no. No. Cut 7, go.
The Electoral College seems very undemocratic to me. I mean, I think at first blush.
but it also was an attempt to unify the less populated areas to try and give some voice. Now, those who would say this, the state of Wyoming has about 500 and some thousand people. They have less than in this congressional district. But the two senators from Wyoming have the same clout as the two senators from California. And the electoral college system and how we divide that representative proportion is a challenge. So
it's not a challenge. Let's slow down a second. Did he make this complaint about Delaware, Mr. Producer? Did you ever hear him do that? Why do we have two senators from Delaware? The tiny state with a small population. Why do we have two senators from Rhode Island? They're both Democrats. Tiny state with a small population. I mean, you can go through every state and do this, and this is exactly the point. They want to undo what was settled at the Constitutional Convention. We would never have a country if a guy like this were at the Constitutional Convention, ever. Ever. There would not be a United States of America. What we have here are big states in terms of population, in terms of votes, saying, look, we want to broom out the Electoral College. We want to take charge. We, the blue states, with the big cities. We want to control the suburbs. We want to control the experts. We want to control the rural areas. We don't care if you produce all the food we eat. We don't care if you produce all the energy we use. We don't care about it at all. Completely would unravel the country. It's honestly, folks, this will be too complicated for the mediocreite types. But these are the kind of arguments that were used before and into the Civil War. That we states have the power. We states have the power to impose our will. We states have the power to do whatever we want. No, we're the United States of America. There's federalism, but they're delineated powers. And so when you have somebody who's attacking the foundational principles of this country, like the Electoral College, that say two senators from a tiny populated state like Montana, well, most of the rural areas in this country feed us. Most of the rural areas in this country provide us with our material necessities. We don't have coal mines in Philadelphia. We don't have steel mills in New York City. We don't have wheat growing, fields of wheat in Chicago. The cities produce certain things. The rural areas produce certain things. And so this was the great compromise that the Democrats want to undo. And I tell you this all the time. Go ahead.
Right now, I do think it's incredibly uplifting to me to watch citizens thinking about it, to have us talking about this again.
All right, so let's stop. So he doesn't support the Electoral College. Doesn't support a secure border. Doesn't think China's a grave threat. That he signed a law that gives health care to illegal aliens. Can you imagine this nationally? Because it's happening. That gives free tuition to illegal aliens. That gives driver IDs, licenses to illegal aliens, which, of course, makes it much easier to vote in national elections. They know this. That's why they do it. And what about the Black Lives Matter riots? Ground Zero, Minnesota, Minneapolis. What about it? Did you like that? Do you like the way the governor handled that? Cut 8, go.
And thank God.
By the way, this is May 2020. Go ahead.
And thank God a young person had a camera to video it. Because there's not a person here or listening today that wonders how many times that camera's not there. These are tough questions. These are things that have been brewing in this country for 400 years. We have people out there putting themselves on the line to try and put out fires in our firefighters that are under attack. Those are the things I'm asking you. Help me restore that order. We will do that under state leadership and state guidance. You will hear directly from them of once that decision was made around 12:15 last night, and that first mission was executed around 3:45 at the 3rd precinct, we will see a difference. So I'm asking...
Let's stop right here. He's rambling. He's incoherent. Because the problem is for a Marxist socialist who attacks the cops, who attacks law and order, who says society is so thoroughly unjust, it's a white-dominated society, even though he's as white as they come, but that's all right. Then to talk about law and order and protecting the precincts and protecting the streets, this is not acceptable, you see. This is why he sounds like Professor Irwin Corey here. He's making no sense. None. Go ahead.
To talk about this. I also want to think about what happens when we don't have that. People who are concerned about that police presence of an overly armed camp in their neighborhoods that is not seen in communities where children...
Okay, this is what I mean. This is the top executive in the state of Minnesota who failed the people of Minnesota. He failed the people of Minneapolis. Failed them. Completely. She's a failed vice president. He's a failed governor. They're extreme ideologues, no matter how much money they spend and how much the media try to change reality, because they must. Because they must. And here she is, Kamala Harris, in November 2021, asked about inflation. Are you concerned about inflation in America? Well, she has no proposal to deal with it because her ideology, her socialism, his socialism, cause it. China's on its back economically right now, or it would have already invaded Taiwan. This centralized crap doesn't work. Cut 3, go ahead.
What else are you going to do to fix this problem with inflation?
All right, thank you. Well, let's start with this. Prices have gone up. And families and individuals are dealing with the realities of that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up. That's about having to stress and stretch.
All right, thank you for nothing. Can you imagine? And the Democrat Party wants to install her in the Oval Office and install this other thug. These radical kooks who ramble on and on, who make promises to everyone for everything and are utterly incoherent. Now we have two of them, Tweedledee and Tweedledummy. Tweedledee and Tweedledummy. One in a pantsuit, one in a regular suit. On and on about abortion. Trump will ban abortion, he said. Trump just said he won't. What else does he have to do to explain that? The court didn't ban abortion. The court didn't rule abortion is unconstitutional. It could have. It did not. The court ruled it's up to the states. Now the blue states, they're having a blast. More abortions than you can possibly imagine. More abortions in America than before the Dobbs decision. And they're running on abortion. Well, that subject's not going to feed anybody in your family. That subject's not going to lower the price of gas. The subject is not going to make housing affordable, rent affordable, or any of those other things. This is how the Democrat Party plays. They claim to represent the little guy when they crush the little guy. They claim to represent freedom when they support autocracy and tyranny. And then they blame everybody else when their ideology fails, as it must. As it must.
Mark Levin. The Great One makes your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
I have a very serious question to ask you about this guy, Walz. I read about him. I knew very little about him. I look at his focus. This guy is not just an extremist like we've never seen on any national ticket. I'm starting to wonder if he's a pervert. I'm not kidding. He's taking the lead on so many issues that are utterly perverse. Tampons in boys' bathrooms? Is that a Midwestern value? Because the media in Washington, D.C., New York, and Los Angeles are telling us that's a Midwestern value. I just want to make sure I understand. So tampons in boys' bathrooms in public schools, that's a Midwestern value? Boy, somebody better teach this guy some science. Who knew that boys can menstruate? I had no idea. But in all seriousness, I thought that the left, the Democrats, the radicals, keep government out of your bedroom. They won't get out of the bedroom. As a matter of fact, it gets worse than that, ladies and gentlemen. Minnesota is a sanctuary state, not just for illegal aliens, but for child sex changes. Is that another Midwestern value that I'm unaware of? Child sex changes? I mean, George Stephanopoulos said it is. George Stephanopoulos also cited Tim Walz's military record. We're going to get into that, too. From our friends at National Review. Newly minted vice presidential candidate Tim Walz signed a bill in April 2023 that made his state a sanctuary for child sex changes, promoting tourism for such radical medical interventions in defiance of states that restrict them. A tourist site for child sex changes? A Midwestern value? Dubbed the Trans Refugee Bill by its supporters, the law grants legal protection to children who travel to Minnesota for so-called gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers, reconstructive genital surgery, and hormone therapy, as well as the medical practitioners who provide it. See, I see it differently. Minnesota is now a haven for child abuse, for the medical and surgical disfiguration of children. The law prohibits Minnesota courts or officials from complying with child removal requests, extraditions, arrests, or subpoenas related to a child sex change procedure received in Minnesota, even if they're a crime in another state. So if you're in a neighboring state, you go to your court, that child is your child, that child is a citizen of your state, you get an extradition order from your court in your state. He signed a bill that says, too damn bad. That child is in Minnesota, therefore, he's our property. The law makes seeking gender transition procedures for minors a factor in some assessments for whether a Minnesota court has jurisdiction to make an initial determination in child custody cases. In other words, what they're trying to say there, and I'll make it more clear, the court can determine if that child should have a sex change or if the parent should have permitted it. And if the court concludes that the parent's opposition is unreasonable or unacceptable, they can lose custody of their child to the state. To the state. Is that a Midwestern value? I just want to make sure I understand this. It also gives courts temporary emergency jurisdiction of a child if a child comes to Minnesota from a state that refused them the procedures. So if a child takes a bus and gets to Minnesota, Minnesota gives that child safe haven to have a sex change. Republican lawmakers who criticized the bill argued it undermined parental rights, would lead children down the dangerous, slippery slope of experimental, life-altering gender treatments. And it goes on. That's perverse. That's sick. Sick. And what's with these tampons in boys' bathrooms in public schools? That's sick. That's sick. Years ago, we called this perversion. I look at this guy now, this Tim Walz. Tell me what you think, Mr. Producer. I figure you put him in a raincoat on the corner, and he looks like a pervert now in my eyes. Does he not to you? This is a very, very weird man. But weird doesn't define him. Pathological defines him when we get into some of these other areas. Let's talk about abortion. We've talked about tampons because they're prominent in his administration. We've now talked about a child trans sanctuary, which is now Minnesota, the most radical law in the nation. And now we talk about abortion. Abortion in Minnesota is the most extreme in the country. There are others that do it too, the way he does it. Virtually no limits. You know, Roe v. Wade had limits, the third trimester. But in the case of Minnesota, you don't have to have parental notification. You can have an abortion right up to the end. It's as extreme as it gets. It is infanticide. That's why I call this guy, he's the waist down guy. He's pretty sick. He's pretty extreme, don't you think? And that's why the media are telling you he has Midwestern values. That's why the media wants you to think, oh, this guy was a teacher, you know, he served in the military, he's a hunter. All of a sudden, Chris Matthews is out there calling Kamala Harris John Wayne. That seems kind of weird to me, doesn't it, you? I think John Wayne was a male. I don't think Kamala Harris is. John Wayne? Now everybody's John Wayne. They hate John Wayne. I love John Wayne. As a matter of fact, people ask me on my lapel, I have an American flag, and on the other lapel, depending on what state I'm in, where my jacket is, I have a John Wayne button. But nonetheless, the propagandists in the media and the propagandists of the Democrat Party are trying to convince you this guy's a moderate. While Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the Democrat Socialists of America, that's AOC, Tlaib, Omar, are praising it. Pam Yamama, whatever her name is, the head of the progressives in the House, she is thrilled with this. All the Marxist Islamists are besides themselves with happiness. And of course, Obama is, with his invisible hand behind the scenes. This is a moderate to the Democrats. I think we should accept them at their word. This is a moderate to the Democrats. What's an extremist to the Democrats? I'm serious. What is an extremist? What we've learned about this guy is not only is he, in my view, kind of a pervert. And look, these are perverse. That's all I mean. It's perverse. And people who celebrate this, whether they're Democrats, perverse. It's perverse. There may be children. There may be children who are subject to this issue of genital confusion and so forth, but the vast majority of the research says the overwhelming majority grow out of it. So you don't start taking the butcher's knife or get into this genitalia medical activity. What's the hurry? If they're 6 years old or they're 8 years old, what's the hurry? And yet Minnesota is ground zero for children sex change operations, sex change medical procedures. Ground zero. It's a sanctuary state for sex change procedures for children. He's a moderate, don't you know? Tampons in boys' bathrooms in public. So he's a moderate, don't you know? Abortion at the very last second before birth. That's a moderate position. It's a Midwestern position, don't you know? This is what they think and believe in the Midwest, in Michigan, in Wisconsin. Battleground states. This is the so-called blue wall. It's blue, but it's not a blue wall. The most radical position on abortion, the most radical position on sex change and medical change operations for children. the most bizarre position when it comes to tampons in boys' bathrooms. This is perverse. It has nothing to do with Midwest values. This guy is a radical leftist. He's endorsed by the Democrat Socialists of America. That's a commie organization. He's endorsed by Bernie Sanders. He's a commie. He's endorsed by Elizabeth Warren. She's a commie. Endorsed by all the commie operations out there, all the radical leftists, by the Marxists and the Islamists. And now they want you to believe, oh, he's quintessential America. We heard this from George Stephanopoulos last night. George Stephanopoulos, we heard this from him. And he's also a nut. He's absolute kook. I'll give you an example. Let's get number 2 ready, Mr. Producer. He knows not of what he speaks, but he never shuts the hell up. Here's Tim Walz in Minnesota press conference, a flashback. We want to power our Navy with algae. Algae. Cut 2, go.
The Pentagon is not a bunch of green tree huggers. The Pentagon understands it's a risk to the climate, it's a risk to the environment, and it's a national security issue. They're trying to create the Great Green Fleet where we power our Navy using algae.
Yeah, they made that decision on their own. Nobody forced it on them. Now, Bernie Sanders, a self-hating Jew, a Marxist, an Islamist, a red, a commie. Actually, a Stalinist. And I can prove it, and I've proven it on this program before, given his history. And the kibbutz he worked on, not too far, I'm sure, from the kibbutz Thomas Friedman worked on, all these clowns. Here he is on CNN yesterday. This is 5, Mr. Producer. Here he is on CNN yesterday. Walz has been a champion of working people. He's a champion of work. What does that mean? He's a champion of working people. By destroying a state, massive increases in taxes. You heard Michelle Bachmann last night. She said they had a huge surplus. It's all gone. The state's in debt. People can't leave there fast enough. Minnesota is California, but smaller. Minnesota's California, but more radical. I'll play this when we'll play it now. Let's go to cut 5, Mr. Producer. Go.
The reason that I wanted Governor Walz is, as you know, he comes from a rural state. He has been a champion of the working class. He's passed some very good legislation. And at a time when we have massive levels of income and wealth inequality,
shut up, you commie bastard. Guy's a millionaire. He's worried about inequality. Now, what he should be worried about is those little kids in Minnesota who are going to be forever destroyed. But that's what working Americans want, right? That's what you blue-collar guys want? Blue-collar gals?
Mark Levin. We're giving you nothing but the best of Mark Levin.
So according to the media that is, Tampon Tim is a moderate who represents Midwestern values. That would be, again, the media in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles that hates the Midwest. They don't even spend time in the Midwest. They have no connection to the Midwest. If they were raised in the Midwest, they left it and left it behind. But now they represent the Midwest and rural America. Isn't that right? Because we know in the Midwest, you all would love Tampon Tim. Tampons in every pot. Wait, that's a different president. Well, you know what I mean? Tampons in every boy's restroom in public schools. That won't cause any confusion. He makes Minnesota the trans refuge or the sanctuary state for transing children. Destroying parental rights, destroying the power of other states and their courts. It's a sanctuary trans state. Another Midwestern value, obviously. He signed into law a so-called Civil Rights Act that protected, among others, pedophiles. That's a Midwest value? No, I don't think so. And abortion on demand, the most extreme abortion law in the nation. Now, there's about 7 states that have done this, right up to birth. Right up to birth. That's an obliteration, an evisceration of Roe v. Wade. They keep running Roe v. Wade. This isn't Roe v. Wade. This is infanticide. So it's my contention that the guy's a pervert, among other things. And the next time you look at a picture of him or see him on TV and you watch his weird sort of hyperactivity and his goofy jokes, he told a weird sex joke today. You can see where this guy's mind is. But the question is, why would Kamala Harris choose him as her running mate? Think this demonstrates somebody who is presidential material? You think this demonstrates leadership? Of course not. And he's backed by Bernie Sanders. That should tell you a lot right there. In a raincoat, Bernie... No, never mind. But the media are certain. They're certain. He's a moderate from the Midwest. Here's a little montage. Our friends at Newsbusters. Cut 4. That's 4, Mr. Producer. Go.
The idea that Tim Walz is some lefty is just not true in reality. He got elected in a district that was very moderate.
Walz, of course, was very moderate in Congress.
Establishing himself as a moderate Democrat.
He had a pretty moderate record, rather moderate Democrat, viewed as a moderate Democrat.
He is a centrist. To say that he's more liberal than Vice President Harris or the most liberal congressman, which I'm sure we're going to hear, just not true.
In Congress, he was certainly a centrist, but a more centrist deal-making candidate.
Kind of a centrist Midwesterner in persona.
A more centrist type who can appeal to suburban voters.
We have heard from Democrats who know him who describe him as folksy, as somebody who can reach out to independents.
He will be able to pull over some of those more moderate voters.
He has a history of appealing to the more rural, moderate voter out there.
Moderates, even moderate Republicans.
Absolutely more moderate than people are giving him credit for right now. I would like someone to point out a place that he is different on an issue than Josh Shapiro.
Genitalia. May I say penises and vaginas? Seems to be a little bit more extreme than, say, Josh Shapiro. And these policies do sort of reflect a perversion, in my humble opinion, that most Midwesterners would reject. Not at ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and MSNBC. This is moderate to them. God knows what's in their bathrooms. God knows what they're up to. But this is very normal for them. I'm sure all of them would support having their kids transitioned without their permission. Right, George Stephanopoulos? You would support that, wouldn't you? I'm sure they all support abortion right before birth. Sure, why not? Oh, they all support a bill, a civil rights bill that protects pedophiles. Very moderate. You know, when he was in the House, he was just so damn moderate. But he's governor. And now they want him to be vice president. And despite their lies, despite the media in America parroting the media in the old Soviet Union, parroting the media in communist China, parroting the media in Russia, parroting the media in the Islamo-Nazi regime in Iran, despite our media parroting the media in genocidal dictatorships and destroying the First Amendment and free speech and destroying the press and destroying the ability of people to vote with actual knowledge, they're okay. They all say the same damn thing because that's what state-run Pravda, Al Jazeera media do. And there's Bernie Sanders. It's a character witness. I ought to tell you everything you need to know. Everything you need to know. But you see, that's not the issue. Free school lunches. Free school lunches? Yes. And free school breakfasts. Oh, that's cool. And free health care to illegal immigrants. Oh, that's cool. Yes. And free meals for illegal immigrants. Who's paying for all this? Please, don't press us. Don't press us. Here's a new MAGA ad. It's actually quite good. It's quite short. Number 8, Mr. Producer. Take a listen to this. Cut 8, go.
What could be weirder than signing a bill into law that requires schools to stock tampons in boys' bathrooms?
I can tell you, it's a pervert. Why do we call him weird? He's worse than weird. He's a freak, a fraud, and in my view, with his obsession with the genitalia, what little kids should do with their genitalia. His obsession with signing bills with pedophilia and abortion. Something's wrong with this guy. I'm being honest with you. Where are all the psychologists that spent all those years on Donald Trump? How come they're not spending any time on Tim Walz? Oh, yeah. The Timster. Makes you look at him differently now, doesn't it? As I said, think about him with a raincoat on and go, holy mackerel. Holy mackerel. He looks the part of a Midwesterner. No, he doesn't. He looks the part. Go ahead, Mr. Producer.
Signing legislation allowing minors to receive sex change operations. Try electing the man who signed those bills Vice President of the United States. Enter Chief Weirdo Tim Walz. As governor of Minnesota, Walz supported legislation that endangers minors, hurts women, and puts radical ideology ahead of common sense. Now Kamala wants Walz to enforce those laws on a national scale. Tim Walz, too weird, too radical.
His name from now on is Tampon Tim. I didn't come up with it, but I like it. It says all you need to know. Tampon Tim. And so the question is, in my mind, is he a pervert or not? Is he a pervert or not? Well, Mehdi Hassan on CNN. Wait a minute. Didn't this guy used to work for MSNBC? I could be wrong. Didn't they have a video of this guy trashing Jews? Maybe it's the wrong Mehdi Hassan. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Well, he's standing up for Tim Walz, too. Tim Walz is our guy. Yeah, he's a moderate with Midwestern values. Now, let me ask you something. If he were a real moderate with Midwestern values, you think they'd support him? On the radical left in the media? No. Look what they're doing to J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is a real kind of Midwestern guy who really did demonstrate that the American dream works. Tim Walz is running around. You want to change your genitalia? Come into my state. You want abortion on demand? Come into my state. Your little boys need tampons? Come into my state. You know, we used to arrest people like this, Mr. Producer. Now they elect him governor in blue states. And so attractive are his policies that Kamala Harris could have chosen anybody. And she chose Tim Walz. Now, what does that tell you about Kamala Harris? Good pick, America? Does she share Midwestern values, too, coming out of San Francisco? Does she? Minneapolis, St. Paul. Minneapolis burned to the ground. The riots were violent and horrendous. They surrendered the 3rd precinct at the direction of the governor. The police did. The National Guard wasn't sent in until much too late, and only then 100 National Guardsmen. The mayor's a lefty, asked for 600. Well, he's great on all fronts. When it comes to genitalia, when it comes to a kid's genitalia, oh, he's unbelievable. And then when it comes to law and order, well, he's on the wrong side. But don't worry. He wants free school meals for children. Mehdi Hassan on CNN. Cut 7, go.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to try and seize on it. I never buy this. This is good for us nonsense. Trump also, I think, posted today, Walz brings hell on earth. And like anyone who's seen the guy, hell on earth is not when you see him holding a piglet or hugging children.
No, I'll tell you what I think when I see him. I see a guy in a raincoat. Tell my kids, stay away from that guy. That's what I see. I'm being honest. But don't worry, Mehdi Hassan, formerly, I believe, of MSLSD, now with the Constipated News Network, he's there, baby. The propagandists are out. They're out. They're spinning. They're twisting. They're pretzeling all over the damn place. They want you to believe he's a moderate. So why didn't she choose a moderate? She chose, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest whack job imaginable. He's a whack job. He looks like a whack job. He talks like a whack job. He's got these weird flinches and movements. He can't stand still like a whack job. And then look at his priorities. He's a whack job. But don't worry, Mehdi Hassan, formerly of MSLSD, now the Constipated News Network, he'll straighten us out. Go!
School meals. One of the things I pushed, and I mentioned to you last week, was his record. Joe mentioned his record in the House. His record as a governor, I know, appealed to Kamala Harris. That's the kind of
Isn't
record
it interesting? They keep talking about his record in the House. He's been governor. That's why she chose him, not because of his record in the House. Oh, his record in the House. No, he's a governor. His record as governor. Why do they keep calling it a progressive record? This is why I wrote the book American Marxism. 1.4 million copies. And the media apparently didn't read it. They keep calling them progressives. They keep using the propaganda, the language of the early American Marxists. Don't say Marxism. No. People won't like that. No. We're progressives. Progressives. He really is a progressive. He's a Marxist. He even admits to being a socialist. But he's a Marxist. Go ahead.
In the White House, where he's passing, securing abortion rights, expanding voting rights, expanding child tax credit, getting gun control legislation done.
Whoa. Gun control? I thought he was a hunter. Mehdi Hassan, you blew the lid off the cover up here. He's a hunter. He doesn't oppose guns. Yes, he does. He wants to confiscate weapons. Why do we need morons like Mehdi Hassan? Why do we need any of these Democrat hack, radical left-wing Marxists to tell us his record when we can go find it out ourselves? Why are the media, the propagandists for, the cover-up artists for these Democrats all the time? Let me tell you where you really stand. No, shut the hell up and sit down. We got video of Kamala Harris like we had video of Biden shuffling around, banging his head on the door. Oh, no, that's wrong. The right-wingers are doing that. Now the right-wingers are trying to change Tampon Tim's record. No. Oh, okay, I'm so sorry.